25 years ago, Sayeh Hassan fled Iran with her family. She was 7 years old. Since then, she's become a criminal lawyer and one of Canada's most outspoken voices, denouncing the Iranian regime and exposing the inroads that they're trying to make into this country. And then we'll have Rabbi Jerry Steinberg, who went from Seminary to Ashram, and as he says in his book about his spiritual quest, Beyond. What did he learn, and what could we learn from him? First, let's meet Sayeh. Welcome, Sayeh.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You have become, in the last 5 years, the most visible opponent of the Iranian regime in Canada. This is what you've said. Although the Canadian government has severed diplomatic ties, which you thoroughly approve of, right?
Absolutely, yes.
They've granted visas to Iranian government officials to come to Canada for an interparliamentary meeting. I want your comment on that. And after that, your evidence on what they're doing in Canada and how they're trying to recruit. So first, let's address the Canadian government. What are they doing? You accuse them of backpedaling.
Well, I was very thrilled when the Canadian government decided to shut down the embassy. That's something that Iranian Canadians had been promoting and lobbying for so many years. So we were very happy to see that happen. Unfortunately, it seems like right now they're granting visas to, and they have granted visas to a number of Iranian parliamentaries to come to Quebec City and participate in an interparliamentary union meeting. And that's a big concern. It seems like from the one hand, they're kicking the Iranian officials out, and from the back door, they're letting them into the country again.
It's like the right hand is doing something and the left hand doesn't know what it's doing.
That's what it seems like to me, and it's unfortunate.
So you have uttered this vociferously in the press and the media. Have you had any response from the government?
No, unfortunately, I have not. And I understand Canada has certain obligations in terms of UN, and they have to cooperate.
So this meeting is a UN event?
That's what I understand, yes. And there are different parliamentaries from different countries coming into Canada. But what the Canadian government is saying is as long as these parliamentaries don't have criminal records, to keep them from coming into Canada, that it's okay for them to come. But what Iranian Canadians are saying, that these individuals are part of one of the most brutal dictatorships in the world, and their hands are guilty of blood of Iranian people. They take part in the oppression, in the rape, torture, and execution of so many Iranian dissidents. So that's my concern, not necessarily that they don't have a criminal record, but that they're part of this brutal dictatorship.
Which is one of the reasons why the embassy was closed in the first place.
Exactly.
One of the accusations against the embassy, the Iranian embassy, is that they are recruiting people here, that they have cells that are intelligence gathering and operational. But what evidence do we have of that?
Well, and it's not just the embassy. I think the scary part is right now the embassy is closed, but they have so many other cells there, and they're active in so many other ways through Iranian community centers.
Where else?
Through mosques. In Canadian universities, there are numerous Iranian student associations, especially in Carleton University, that is very closely linked and associated to the Iranian regime officials back home. So it's not just the embassy, but there are so many different forums where they're active.
Across the road from where I go for acupuncture, I noticed a house with a sign that said Iranian Cultural Center, but I never saw anybody go in there. When I asked further, I got the feeling that it was one of these actual places that they have. Is that correct?
It's very possible. There are numerous cultural centers across Canada, and what they do is they organize so-called cultural events in an attempt to try to show a different face of the Islamic regime, to get away from the murders and the rapes and the tortures, and to show a cultural face, a facet. So that's one of the things that they do, and they try to get Canadians involved to come to these events to give a good impression of the Islamic regime and what is going on in Iran.
So it's kind of a propaganda
That's right, exactly what it is.
And how do they go about recruiting Iranian Canadians here?
Well, I think it's more of a trying to influence people exactly through these cultural events, through Canadian universities having these associations there. And these associations, a lot of them are run by students who get bursaries from the Islamic regime. So they come here and their purpose isn't necessarily to get an education. Their purpose is to spy on other student activists who are in universities, to organize these types of events and invite, important Canadian officials even in order to try to manipulate them or to show a different side of the Iranian regime. And they spy and they intimidate, activists both inside the universities and outside.
Do they ever blackmail Canadians here, Iranian Canadians, with threats against their families there in Iran?
There have been many cases where people are very concerned about families back home. I have personally been threatened. My life has been threatened in Canada. They have had me in Iranian state media, and they have said that they're following me and that I'm an anti-revolutionary. So there are a lot of these types of concerns for a lot of Iranian Canadian activists.
When we come back, we'll hear more about Iran and the Revolutionary Guards and what we should be doing about this.
Great, sounds good.
Sayeh, 2009, there was a huge protest on the streets of Tehran. Thousands of people marched and hundreds were attacked. Unfortunately, the West did not support it openly. Since then, we hear little about protest. And many of you especially, are in the forefront of advocating regime change. How is this going to happen?
Well, see, first I want to explain a little bit about the Iranian political structure because a lot of people don't know. We have the supreme leader, who's the hardliner, and then we have two fractions. We have the hardliners like Ahmadinejad, who supports Khamenei, and then we have the reformist, who want small changes within the Islamic regime, but they have no interest in changing the entire system. They just want to have small reforms, but they want to have the Islamic regime in power. And what happened in 2009, there were elections, which we all know we have not had free elections in Iran for 32 years. And each candidate that runs for presidency has to be approved by the supreme leader. So even the reformist people who were candidates who were running, they were approved by the supreme leader to run for candidacy. And so a lot of people came out, and the media, especially the Western media, tried to make it seem like this was about reform, that people wanted the reformist candidate and they wanted the green revolution. Green is associated with reform and not with regime change. But the reality is a lot of the people that came into streets, they wanted complete and total regime change. They didn't want anything to do either with the reformist candidate Mousavi or with any of the hardliners. And the slogans in the street was Mousavi is just an excuse and the entire regime is targeted. So people were looking for regime change, and they came out in millions, not thousands, in 2009. It was the biggest protest the Islamic regime had seen in many years.
So everything's in place because the population doesn't like this government, hates them.
Yes.
Why isn't it happening?
It's difficult because the Islamic regime is a regime of torture and rape and executions. And every time people come into the street, like you said, they're arrested, they're tortured, they're raped, and a lot of them are executed. So there is that fear. At the same time, though, the movement in Iran is very strong, and people are, fighting very hard to get rid of this regime. But I think we need certain kind of help from the international community.
And do we have time for help?
I think we're moving in that direction.
Are the sanctions working?
I believe that they are. Some people might disagree with me, but the oil sanctions and these, smart economic sanctions is what I call them. They have put a lot of pressure on the people of Iran. That is very true, and I'm very sad to see that what's going on, within the Iranian community. But it's also put a lot of pressure on the regime. And we have to keep in mind this regime, it's a brutal regime. It's not going anywhere without, some kind of pressure. There has to be a price for freedom. That's the unfortunate reality. And this is, the price that a lot of Iranian people are actually willing to pay. And many of them have been fighting for, and hoping that there would be sanctions. And
what evidence do you have that the regime is being affected by this?
Just a couple of weeks ago, there was a huge protest in Tehran with people and in the bazaar, the merchants' place.
Because of the economic chaos.
Exactly. And this shows the kind of pressure that...
But do they care? Do they care that the people are in trouble? With this ideology that of salvation and the Mahdi coming, the Messiah coming, do they care? It's not like the Soviet Union's ideology.
No,
this is transcends reality. It's another kind of reality. It's another kind of thinking. Could this really anything affect the thinking of this regime except military intervention?
Does the regime care? Absolutely not, and they have not cared for 32 years. But that's not the point. The point is for people to get that power, to put that pressure and remove the regime from power. And I think that's why sanctions are so important. And one of the most important, other most important factor is political isolation of the Islamic regime, which is something that Canada has done, shut down the embassy.
The United States has not done it.
No, and unfortunately, it seems like President Obama is speaking about dialogue with the Iranian regime.
He started with dialogue. He had to have his arm twisted to get these sanctions going, didn't he? And now he's talking again about dialogue?
And that concerns me, and I'm sure it concerns a lot of Iranian Americans who are, thinking about voting in the elections. But this is very important. Political isolation, shutting down embassies in all countries, not allowing Iran to participate in international political bodies like the United Nations. Those are the kinds of help that the Iranian people need in order to overthrow the regime.
The clock is ticking, as they kept saying in the presidential debate. Nuclear weapons, they have them. There's evidence that they have them in place. And they have time to make more. Do we have time for the population to give them enough support, to give them time to react and overthrow?
And then there's no question the regime has to go, and it has to go as soon as possible.
Well, how do you feel about military intervention?
I am completely against military intervention, and I think, it would be very hard-pressed to find any Iranian person that would be for military intervention. I think it's a very minority group of people who would support it, and I think it would actually be very counterproductive because Iranians are extremely nationalistic people, and if they see any kind of foreign military interventions, they might even go and back the regime to protect their country and their borders. That's what I think, and that's my major concern. And also, we've already had an 8-year war with Iraq. We had it in the 80s. It destroyed our country. It killed so many people. And we've had this war against the regime killing our Iranian people and oppressing and torturing them. I don't think Iranian people can handle another military intervention.
Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, what will it take? And how can we support regime change in Iran?
Thank you.
Sayeh Hassan, we're talking about regime change, and we're talking about what we can do right here, which is, and I didn't know this, I thought the Revolutionary Guards were labeled a terrorist organization, But you say not. Hezbollah has, but not the Revolutionary Guards.
No, unfortunately not. But obviously that's another step that the Canadian government can take to help support the pro-democracy movement in Iran. And it shouldn't stop with the Revolutionary Guards. There are a lot of regime agents who have come to Canada with millions of dollars, people who have been regime officials before, who have come here with millions of dollars, with investments, who have made a home here. And these are the people that also the Canadian government has to identify and has to deal with their immigration files and freeze obviously all of their assets, because these monies that are coming belong to the Iranian people and they have to be returned once there is a democratic regime change in Iran.
What can we do to accelerate this? You're against military intervention.
Yes.
You're for supporting the already existing dissident movement.
Yes.
People want to get rid of them, but what can we do to accelerate this?
Well, keep with the sanctions. I think Mitt Romney had a very good solution to tighten up even the sanctions that we have right now, especially as it relates to oil, because that's where the regime is getting a lot of its money and revenue. And also political isolation is very, very important. Shut down the embassies in all the countries across the world. Don't allow the Iranian regime to participate in various UN meetings and various international bodies, political bodies. Those are the two things that if it's actually done, it's not going to take very long for the Iranian people to overthrow the regime.
It sounds so simple, overthrow the regime. You need weapons. They're not going to go down with no fight.
Absolutely not. They're not going to go down with no fight.
Are we going to see another Syria in Iran?
No, I mean, we had another revolution in 1979, and it was mostly with people coming out. I think if millions of people come out, there's only so much the regime can do. It's just a matter of getting that force behind the people and getting them to come into the streets. And once the regime is weakened in the way that I'm suggesting, with the sanctions and political isolation, it's going to be that much easier for the people to overthrow this regime.
What should we be doing individually as Canadian citizens? What can we do?
I think we can do a lot. One of the most important...
One of the things you said is that you're not getting your message out on mainstream media. Is that correct?
Not as much as I would like, yes. And I think that's one of the most important things, to just get the message across, to inform people. I don't think a lot of Canadians know that, the regime here has cultural centers, that they're active in various mosques, that they're active in Canadian universities that the taxpayers are paying for. So I think one of the most important things is just to get the message out, and that's something that we all need to do, be informed, lobby our Canadian government officials, our member of parliament, to outlaw the revolution, to list the Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist organization, to identify all of these individuals, regime officials that are living here in Canada with millions of dollars.
How can they do that? Screen their immigration application more carefully? Or they lie. I mean, they'll lie to do this, won't they?
The Canadian government needs to look at this. I mean, one example was Mahmoud Reza Khavari. He was the leader of the head of the National Bank in Iran. So this is a bank that was sanctioned by both US and Canada for its involvement in supporting terrorism and for funding the nuclear program in Iran. The head of this bank is living in Canada, brought in millions of dollars. And this was exposed last October, that this guy is here in Canada and he has a Canadian citizenship. How is that possible? And this is one guy that we were able to identify, but what about the rest of them? Canadian government needs to take a serious look at this issue. It's a very big concern.
Do you think that our government is doing enough?
I think they could do more. I think I'm very disappointed to see that the visas were granted for these parliamentaries to come to Canada after the embassy was shut down. And I hate to see and to know that these regime officials are living in Canada, same country as me, bringing in millions of dollars stolen from Iranian people. I mean, Canadian government really needs to start to do more.
We have just a little bit of time remaining. What do you know about their nuclear weapons?
It's a concern, and I know that they're working towards it. I'm not an expert in that field, but I think it's something that all of us need to be very concerned about. But that's not the only concern. There's also human rights issues, major issues in Iran, and there's also Iran's support for international terrorism, supporting Hamas, Hezbollah. So there are three major concerns, and I don't think we should just isolate one. I think we should look and be concerned about all three of them.
Can we get to Iran in other ways? Since they're sponsors of international terrorism, is there any way that we can weaken them outside of Iran?
Political isolation.
Again, political isolation.
I think that's the key. It's very important.
Do you think what's happening in Syria will weaken the regime?
It depends, I think, on the outcome and what happens. But I know the Iranian regime is supporting the Syrian government, and they're even sending in revolutionary guards, and they're sending in funds to help the government.
Are they sending in revolutionary guards to Hezbollah?
I don't know if they're sending revolutionary guards to Hezbollah, but I know that they're supporting them financially. And they have for so many years, yeah. And Hamas as well.
So in one word, what's the message you want to give people?
That the Iranian people want regime change. They want the overthrow of this regime, and we just need the international community to isolate this regime politically and allow the Iranian people to do what they need to do and get rid of this regime.
Is there anybody that you would suggest to contact if people want to contact you?
Absolutely. I have a blog. It's called Shira Khorshid Forever, which is pretty long. But if you just Google my name, Sayeh Hassan, either on Google.
And her name is on the titler.
Yes. Or on Facebook, you can find me, and I'm very accessible.
That keeps you up to date with what Sayeh is doing, because unfortunately, major media are not reporting, according to you, are not reporting enough and making people enough aware of what inroads, of what the Iranians are doing to recruit, to gather intelligence, and even, according to Reza Khalili, who was a spy for the Revolutionary Guards and for the CIA, they are targeting operationally, which means they're ready to go to attack. Would you agree with that assessment?
I'm very concerned about the regime's presence here. That's all I can say. And I think we really need to be aware and concerned. And Canadian government really needs to take more steps towards, against this issue.
I wish you every success, and be in touch with us with all the latest developments that you know about, since you have so much inside information.
I will. Thank you so much for having me.
And I thank you.
Thank you.
Animated by one supreme being, which is the God.
We don't do this in a sense of feminism, rather this is...
The interesting thing is that the political will seems to have come.
You can find it only in Jews and Palestinians.
A very good job at keeping it under control.
That liberating people who are thought to be unjust because of social, economic, or political conditions.
That time I thought it was so scary.
Officials do everything you do.
When you know it, so you...
Proxies of the Vision 27 meeting together.
As they began wrong things in the slow.
Hello and welcome to Menschlife. I'm David Grossman.
Welcome everybody to the Anna Adi Show.
Welcome to Passion Point. My name is Irene Becker.
Hi, I'm Sari Colt, and welcome to Chew on This.
Hi, I'm Gila Marto, and welcome to Gila and Guests.
Welcome to Ladies with Wisdom.
Welcome to Sketch It Up.
I'm Susan Radoshevek, and this is Corner Office.
I'm Doris Epstein, and remember to be a mensch.
Sometimes I hate being Batman.
You just admitted being Batman. You just admitted it.
No, guys. I said I hated being a fat man.
No, that
I
was
hate being a fat man.
It was a hard beat. It was a hard beat.
That was all bad.
Forget it.
Yeah.
Alfred, it happened again.
Dr. French.
I don't know how he does
Rabbi Jerry Steinberg, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
You are the most unusual rabbi that I have ever met in my entire life, and maybe that anybody has ever heard about. It's all in this book, Rogue Rabbi, A Spiritual Quest from Seminary to Ashram. And that's what you did.
Yes.
You became a rabbi.
Yes.
That would have been enough for most people, enough of a life.
Yeah.
But that wasn't enough for you. It was part of your spiritual quest that took you many places, inside, interior, and exterior, living on ashram for years, and all the while remaining true to your belief in Judaism and your practice of Judaism. You were born in Regina, Saskatchewan.
That's right.
Your parents were Orthodox Jews.
In a sense.
Observant Jews.
In a sense. Regina was an Orthodox community, but not everybody adhered strictly to it, but that's all we knew. Orthodoxy was it for Western Canada in general at that time.
In general for most people. Reform started coming to the fore, and that's where you trained.
That's right.
As a Reform rabbi.
Correct.
What happened after that?
After my training?
Yes.
In the last year of my seminary, which was the 5th year of my training, I didn't feel spiritually authentic. The training that I received was very good academically. It taught me how to think. It gave me a good background in Judaism. But at the spiritual level, I didn't feel satisfied, and I didn't feel authentic enough that I could go out and preach God and Torah and so on to the public with what I had at that time. And the seminary did not give me the spiritual dimension that I needed. So because I had had some exposure to yoga and meditation, I discussed that at that time with my wife, and I said I need to go someplace where I can just sit for a year and explore myself spiritually. And she was in agreement. And finally, we decided to go to an ashram in the interior British Columbia, which I was directed to by an Orthodox rabbi who had the Swami, was the head of that ashram, for a Seder, Passover Seder, at his place a few years before. So he suggested I contact her. She had come from Germany and was well aware of, the history with the Jews, and she was delighted to have Shula and I come to
and in that ashram, you continued your Jewish practice. You conducted Shabbat. You did the Chagim, right?
The ashram was wonderful. They said, we want, we're going to teach you about meditation and about Hinduism and so on. You teach us about Judaism. So every Friday night I conducted a Shabbat service, and we passed the kosher wine around, which was the only time the Swamis were allowed to drink wine. And then Saturday evening, my wife conducted the closing of the Sabbath, the Havdalah service. We taught them songs, and to the point.
But what did you get out of it? It was Hindu in philosophy?
Primarily it was, but the practices that you did, the meditation practices, for example, could be, I apply to Judaism, or you could apply it to Christianity, or to any particular religion, or non-religion for that particular matter.
Can you put into words what all those years?
Well, there was 2 years that were in the ashram. Yeah.
But you continued the practice of meditation,
yes,
even more so.
To practice and to teach.
You continued investigating other dimensions of reality, which
Correct.
we'll get to in a minute.
Sure.
What did that do? What did you learn?
The ashram gave me the kind of experiences in other dimensions of reality where I, for the first time, began to have a real understanding of what the Jewish prophets were about in their unusual experiences. And that's really what it gave me. It gave me an appreciation of the prophets, and it gave me the mystical experiences spiritually that I felt more authenticated, that I could go out and speak about contact with God in a way I could never speak of before.
And what can you teach other people? Do we have to go through decades of sitting in silence, meditating, of going to ashrams? Can you shortcut it for us?
I don't think I can do it, but I think you can do it. By that, I mean, okay, I have to introduce to you a concept of what I call ripeness. In other words, if a person is ripe spiritually, then very little meditation, or for that matter, it can be any kind of a catalyst, can trigger that person to have a spiritual experience.
Spirituality is loosely worded.
Okay.
It's on everybody's tongue. What is your definition of spirituality?
Is believing in spirit, in entities external to our normal consciousness and external to the physical body.
In entities?
Yes, spiritual entities. In Judaism, we call them malachim, or angels. Maimonides, one of our greatest scholars of the and greatest names of the 12th century, speaks of them as intelligences that we are able to contact, that will guide us. It can be through dreams, it can be through mystical experiences, and if you are ripe, then it takes very little for you to move into that kind of a contact. And some people can sit, as you say, for years and years and years and never have that kind of experience. And other people who have done nothing at all, but just given a little simple meditative technique, which I did for university students that I was teaching many years ago, some of them were ripe and they had experiences which I read about in the mystical literature of the great religions that people with great names, spiritually, religious names, had that we look upon today as great spiritual masters.
We're going to go into this more deeper.
Okay.
We're going to go into this deeper, starting with Kabbalah, which is practically pop culture today.
Right.
In a minute.
Okay.
Rabbi Steinberg, this is what you say in your book. Kabbalah is the essence of Judaism, the existence of other dimensions of reality, some of which are inhabited by intelligent beings, and which we can interact with, and also the acceptance of non-rationality as a factor in the pursuit of expanded consciousness.
Right.
Let's start with Kabbalah. Madonna's into Kabbalah. Every synagogue is offering courses in Kabbalah. Is this what you mean by Kabbalah?
Most of what is offered by Kabbalah in synagogues is academic. It's a study. It's trying to understand at the rational level what Kabbalah is about. In Judaism, there are two branches of Kabbalah. There is that branch which studies and you can quote some of the masters and you know the concepts. And there's the other branch which emphasizes the actual experience of being in contact with these other dimensions of reality, with malachim or angels, spiritual intelligences. That's what Kabbalah is really about. And if you look at the Torah and the prophets, that's what they were involved with. They were involved with contacts with voices and with visions. And the Torah itself tells us that, you know, if you want to have contact with God, it's either through dreams or through visions, except for Moses, who had a face-to-face contact. And that is what Judaism is essentially about, because without that contact, we wouldn't have had a Moses receiving a revelation on Sinai, because revelation from these other dimensions is contact with intelligences, with, as I say, we can call them angels or spiritual intelligences, whatever you want to say. But this is what inspires people. This is what gives people insights scientifically, artistically, spiritually, through dreams or through visions. Now, just on the side, many years ago, if you said that you were hearing a voice or seeing a vision,
they would lock you up.
That's exactly right. But finally, even the American Psychiatric Association says, well, it's okay to have to hear a voice or a vision as long as there are other people who can corroborate it with you. Yeah,
is that possible?
Yeah. You have groups, you have whole groups who believe in having these kinds of experiences. But Kabbalah means to receive. The Hebrew word, the Kabel, means to receive. And that's the way it differs from prayer. For prayer, you're speaking to God or these spiritual intelligences. In Kabbalah, you are receiving from these other dimensions guidance, inspiration, healing, direction, and so on. So it's a two-way street, and without having revelation, which is receiving, then we would not have had Judaism at all. Because Moses, through Abraham, through the prophets, and after the Bible as well, with all kinds of the rabbis in the Talmud, there were voices that they were hearing. There were visions that they were having, which guided them, even sometimes in cases of Jewish law.
It's a lot to take in.
It's a lot. It's a lot. This is what I'm trying to get out. So pop Kabbalah, which is what people associate with, unfortunately, associate with Madonna, who, by the way, I fully support in her endeavors, and I've heard all kinds of people criticizing her. I don't. I defend her. I think that anybody who wants to listen to spiritual guidance,
even if they're not Jewish,
you know, Judaism is one avenue through which these intelligences and God expresses themselves. But there are the other religions too. There's Islam, there's Christianity, there's Hinduism, there's Buddhism, and there are those who are outside of any religion at all who also receive this kind of inspiration and message.
You say in your book that we need a new definition of God.
Correct.
What do you mean?
The conventional definition of God that most people that I talk to have in their minds is that God is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent. Namely, God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and God is everywhere.
And God is good.
Yes.
Is that part of it?
Well,
only good.
Well, that's part of it. We have a problem with the word called theodicy, which means if God is good and all-powerful and all-knowing, why is there so much tragedy and heartache and suffering in the world?
Why?
Yes, that's the question. So traditionally there are answers, well, God knows what he's doing, and therefore, you know, we shouldn't question, or if you believe in past lives, that this is your karma and you're having to suffer now. Except we run into problems when we come to things like a tsunami, which wipes out 200,000-300,000 people. Do we say, well, then, God had all of them on his list?
And the Holocaust?
And the Holocaust, and small children who are innocent.
And Iran today?
And Iran. You know, I mean, you can go on and on and on. So if you think of God in those terms, it's very, very difficult, and that's why I think a lot of people have been turned off of God, because they cannot reconcile the so-called, as you put it, good God with all the suffering.
Do you have a minute to tell us in a minute your definition of God?
My definition of God is that God is the sum total of all levels of consciousness, of all dimensions of reality. And that our job, our task as human beings is to expand our consciousness into these other dimensions for the benefit of humanity and ourselves.
Okay.
That's very simple.
We'll be back in a minute with your dream work, past lives, regressions, in a minute.
Okay.
Rabbi Steinberg, you have become a psychotherapist and renowned, particularly for your work with dreams. In fact, many people think you're better than Freud.
Well, can I quote you on that?
You can definitely quote me because I have seen evidence in your workshops about your analysis. You can take a tiny recollection and expand it into a world that people get information from about themselves, about where they are and where they should be going. Tell us about your approach to dream work and what you've discovered.
The Talmud says it well. The Talmud says that a dream not interpreted is like a letter not opened. So when someone has a dream, particularly a recurring dream, there are many different kinds of dreams, and they pay little attention to it, it'll keep recurring because there is an issue that they have not resolved, whether it's a spiritual issue, or a physical issue, an emotional issue, a family issue, whatever it happens to be. So it's very important that people understand their dreams, work with their dreams, because it not only gives insight, but it also brings families closer together. It enhances health. It enhances creativity.
Enhances health.
Yes,
and you say in your book that you get a medical diagnosis before it's too late from your dreams. Is that possible?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is, because as I mentioned in the book, in a meeting with a psychiatrist who was a trainer of analysts in this country, he told me himself that many times he had patients come to him saying they had a dream about some part of their bodies not being well. He sent them for medical tests. They all came back negative. Everything was fine, except 2-3 months later, the first symptoms began to appear. But it was caught in the very earliest of stages, so that in most cases these individuals were able to have a complete recovery. Our bodies are more sensitive than any medical instrumentation. Our psyches are more sensitive. And that and our dreams are the vehicle through which our psyches express themselves in order for us to be well mentally, emotionally, and physically.
What can we do to remember our dreams?
Well, the first principle in remembering dreams is to want to remember dreams, because it requires some work. Once you have done that, then you go to bed each night and you say a short sentence like, tonight I'm going to remember at least one dream. You have a pad and pen.
Right by your bed.
Right by your bed, and a little soft light so it doesn't disturb your eyes or somebody else who may be with you. And you write down even fragments. And then you start to work with it, and the question is, well, how do you work with it? And that's a talk in itself. And in my workshops, which
Yes.
you've attended, this is where I teach techniques, and I've written about it as well, that people can use to try to understand their particular dreams.
So the first step is to
want to.
Tell yourself, just before you fall asleep.
And to do this for 30 days, and to write down any fragments or anything at all. Put the date down in the book before you go to sleep. So you may only have at the end of the month 30 dates and nothing at all. But people need to remember that from the most recent scientific investigations into dreams that I'm aware of, people dream approximately 2 to 2.5 hours every night. Not all at the same time, spread out throughout the night. And even people who say, well, I don't dream, what really is the story is they don't remember their dreams. But the evidence that we have so far is that everybody does dream approximately that amount of time. And most of that, at least half of that dreaming, is done during the last roughly hour and a half before you awaken in the morning.
All right. That has led you into a controversial area, past life regression.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
I often refer to it as the regression to distant perceptions. So that, because I don't always know whether what the person is telling me actually happened.
But when people speak in different languages.
That's rare. That's extremely rare.
Or remember in detail what they were wearing in the 18th century.
Yes, yes, those are good dreams for exploring past lives. But my approach is, it doesn't matter to me whether it actually happened or it didn't. In some cases, I think it actually did, and I do believe personally in past lives, and here in Judaism we call it Gilgul.
Gilgul, reincarnation.
Reincarnation, yes, and it does exist post-biblically in Judaism. But when I'm working with somebody, what I'm interested in is trying to facilitate wherever they need to go for healing, whether it's physical or emotional or whatever the case happens to be. And I will just guide them. I will never suggest, I'll never input material that I think that they should have. I will always ask them questions, open-ended questions, let them go where they feel that they need to go. And if it's a good session, they will come out with some kind of resolution and some kind of healing. And there are many kinds of...
And some kind of healing?
Yes.
What do you mean exactly?
Well, they will finally realize why, for example, they're afraid of something in particular. A woman came to me who, a Christian woman for that matter, who had an experience of being in the Holocaust as a Jewish child and dying and staying under, having been hidden under a bed for weeks and weeks and weeks and months. And she came to me with a case of what she thought was acrophobia, fear of heights, because she'd get in an elevator and she'd panic before it got to the top. And it had nothing to do with the fear of heights. It had to do with being enclosed in an elevator. Like she had been under a bed, she was confined. And as she eventually began to get insight and to go through some of the emotions of that, she was able to go higher and higher and higher in the building where she worked here in Toronto, until eventually she was able to go up without any more fear.
Do we believe in reincarnation? Do Jews believe in reincarnation?
If you're a Kabbalist, you do, because it's part of Kabbalah. As I say, we call it Gilgul, which means a wheel. And some of our greatest rabbis, such as, for example, Isaac Luria in the 16th century, definitely believed in and talks a great deal about it, as do other rabbis as well.
But what do we have in our teachings, in the Tanakh?
In Tanakh, virtually,
is it mentioned?
In Tanakh, virtually nothing. There is one little line in the book of Job which could be interpreted to mean reincarnation, but that's it. Reincarnation, the concept, is post-biblical in Judaism.
Do you believe in it personally?
I do personally. I definitely believe it personally. I've had my own regressions. I've had people take me on my own regressions, and they were quite powerful experiences.
Intriguing, fascinating, and you can find out more about this in your book, Rogue Rabbi, A Spiritual Quest from Seminary to Ashram by Rabbi Jerry Steinberg. And I thank you.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Okay.
Okay.